he is without question one of the most valuable players in the NFL. It's almost impossible for a non-quarterback to be the most valuable player, but he was out 3 games. They are a completely different team with him healthy. And I mean, it's incredible, really. As Kelce has done it his way, that Kittle has done it his way. It's a little bit different, obviously, but the physicality that he plays with, his catch early in the game, where he got hit low, hit high, popped right up, after he had already taken a 25-yard kind of end around. It's just not end around, but like a swing pass, just ridiculous.
There was a play that, Trent Green, and was it Harlan today? They don't get to call this. They don't get to do many Niner games. And the game was in control, and it was one of those, George got it, and he saw, I could take on this guy, or I could cut back to the middle of the field, and the entire Atlanta Falcons defense was there. And Trent was like, I don't think that he realized he was taking on the entire defense, but that's just kind of George. And I had the thought today, it's set. With Waller being injured, the 2 all-pro tight ends are Kelce and George. Now it's just who's going to be the first team, tight end. Obviously, Kelce's receiving numbers are going to be better than George's. George is 57-6. Kelce's already at 80-7. But there is an element for one of the better running teams in the league that they could not operate without George Kittle. So, we'll see. These next 3 games are going to matter. But I think George is making a play to be the first team All-Pro.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that'll be a challenge, right? Kansas City probably, like you said earlier, is going to be the 1 seed in the AFC.
He just had a pretty legendary walk-off touchdown.
He did. No, he did. And he's played in every game, right? George has missed 3. Yeah, Austin says Mark Andrews.
I'm not going to argue if you give it to him. Just he's a spectacular player. And he is, you have – he's got 83 catches. They got 3 games left. How does he not get to 105, 110? But I think George is an all-pro. And that, to me, is a big deal where it looked like, is he going to have a down season? Is he going to be banged up? He's come back with a fucking vengeance. And
what's his numbers right now?
Travis Kelce?
No. Kittle.
He's 57-6.
Mark Andrews is 75-6.
Yeah, but to me, George is the more impactful
I agree.
player in the
I
league.
agree with you.
I feel like George is going to get some votes.
Yeah, he's just, if you've been, watching them and these are just big games they're playing right now. Obviously, Kansas City's playing the big games too. But this stretch now that he's in, 9 for
part of it is just
13.
This is the shitty part about tight ends is there's only one guy on a squad, right, for the All Pros. Where the wide receivers there are several. It's a pretty loaded position, right? Mark Andrews. I'm not trying to diminish. I watch him. The guy's fucking good. I would take Mark Andrews on my team. Just feels maybe I'm too close to the sun here, but George to me is easily one of the top 10 non-quarterbacks in the NFL.
I'd say it's as simple as this. Kelce is great. Kelce legitimately first-team All-Pro. There is not another person in the National Football League that looks or plays like George Kittle plays. There's not anybody that plays like him this well. Just period. There's not. Now, again, that doesn't mean he's better than Kelce necessarily, because Kelce's different. But there's nobody like him in the league. Not a soul.
Would you say when this season ends, Kelce's going to be a first or second team All-Pro? Or if he's the first team, it'll be his 4th first team, and he's had multiple second teams, and he's going to have 7 straight Pro Bowls and a Super Bowl championship. And is he a lock Hall of Famer when this season ends? Is it over? What else?
My first reaction is no, but
I saw a stat on Thursday night that he had his 6th straight 1,000-yard season as a tight end. No tight end had ever had more than 3 straight. I think you're talking about Kittle, I'm talking about Kelce.
Oh, you're talking about Kelce. I'm sorry.
I'm talking about Kelce.
Yeah, he is. He is.
Do you view Kelce as a Hall of Fame player
Famer.
when you?
I do. Yep.
Right now. If he never played another game starting today, he's in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kittle's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But Kittle is a talented part of what made, and this is what we've talked about it before, and there's just, because it's not like Kelce is not running over the middle, but he is not as violent on contact. He's a little more, I'm not trying to call him a pussy or anything, but you know how Peyton Manning in the pocket would just hit the ground? I'm not trying to prove anything. Kelce's got a little just, he'll just like hit the ground. He's smart. And I think part of it is that's the way they've coached him. He's too inevitable. Part of what makes George fucking awesome, and probably most little kids that are Niner fans, probably their favorite player. Because if I was a 10-year-old, I would have an 85 jersey. But when he jukes a guy, he looks for like the three of them and go, I'm coming after all you guys. It's like, George, you are so invaluable to this team. And I remember talking to Kyle about it, actually at the Combine. It was when he told us he was going to come on the podcast, and then Corona really kicked in about 2 weeks later, and then that's kind of gone out the window. But we were bullshitting about George. And before, I was in the scrum because I wanted to kind of show my face before I walked away with Bob Lang and Kyle. And I asked him a question, like, they're about to pay George, right, that offseason. And I'm like, does it make you nervous that he's such a violent player in the open field? Can you coach that out of him? And he gave kind of a stupid answer. And then we bullshitted as we were walking away after he said he'd come on the podcast. He's like, that was a good question. I'm like, I'm not a media guy. We're just talking ball, two ball guys talking ball. And he's like, it's a hard balance, right? How do your best players, you kind of have to let them be. And there's once you get to a certain point as in a career, as a human being, like part of what made Frank Gore great as a football player, not a fighter, he got KO'd last night, I think, by Deron Williams, is that Frank had a natural ability, right, he just didn't take shots. It really was not part of his game. He avoided
his longevity is why we talk about him, because his numbers were compiled over a long period of time. But if you told me George is just healthy for the next 6 years, I'd say there's no question he's going to the Hall of Fame.
But there is no change. But do you agree there's no changing? And it's not like they're even trying. George is what George is with the ball in his hands. Because he's the same. Every single time he catches a ball, he does the same thing. I'm going to fucking destroy.
There was a play today. You talked about the cutback, which was even more crazy. There was one today where it was basically a decision: go out of bounds or go this way at somebody and try to get another yard. And we know what decision he made. He made that decision, and it got him another yard or two. But the greatest show on turf's philosophy was, no, save the yard. We'll get that yard on the next play when we get 11, 12, 13 more.
And if anyone in Kyle's camp's listening, remind them that everything negative said earlier in the season was Guy. We've moved on, and we've given you flowers. We would love to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, we're just. I
might have said a thing or two as well, but
as well, I had his back. I had your back.
I got some beef with. I do have some beef with one of his guys though, because we just it's getting to that point where.
By the way, before you go there, on Kittle, he's 28. He'll turn 29 in 29 next year, October 9th. Do you agree if I told you Kittle gives you 14 games a year for the next 5 years, that becomes that's a Hall of Fame? It's going to be a Hall of Fame player.
Yeah, I think the difficult part is just going to be, and maybe Kelce's just going to go down as like an all-time great Hall of Famer. His numbers are going to be so stupid in the pass game, right, Travis?
Yeah.
I mean, guy, he's had 85, 83, 100, 97, 105, 83 and counting, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, 8, 10, 5, 11. He'll have probably another 10. So it's fair or not, he is going to be compared to him. And it's like there are no stats. And this is the hard part with offensive linemen. Like Larry Allen got into the Hall of Fame. Trent Williams got in the Hall of Fame just because there's no stats for them. It was just clear. Part of Kittle is like, well, half his game is just clear, right? He's just a dominant player, which will factor in with, a guy like Mayoko will be fighting for him in the room one day.
Part of the Hall of Fame is like you didn't watch the games, right? The Hall of Fame is not made on paper. Like I watched
he's a Hall of Fame NFL talent, no doubt about it.
That's what I'm saying. So if he's a 14-game guy for the next 5 years, he's a Hall of Famer because I know what he is when he's healthy. Complete game changer. Different than everybody else. Different than there is not anyone else like him.
Well, because
who else is going to be like him?
Someone DM'd me, and they said, do you think, because he's like, the last couple years in the draft, a guy like Noah Fant will come out. And they'll be like, generational player. But it's like, he's a tight end that doesn't block. So we just speak about him like a wide receiver. Well, half of his job he can't do, right? And let's face it, most guys don't ever turn into Travis Kelce. So it's like, this guy runs a 4.4. And I was like, there's probably some merit to that. Are you a generational talent at tight end coming out if you're not 8.5 out of 10 as a blocker? Like, just because you run really fast? Like, because I go back to Vernon Davis, who was a generational talent, right? At that time, we'd never seen a guy. He ran a 4.3. He was Jack. You remember Vernon as a blocker? It's like, that motherfucker was powerful at the line of scrimmage. He was a big part of Harbaugh's running game. Vernon could block defensive ends in his prime. So it's like, I do wonder if we don't give enough credibility at that position sometimes. And part of it is like, you get Mark Andrews. And Mark Andrews, if you watch the Ravens, where is 89? He's like in the slot. Like, how often, when Kittle's in the slot, that's not normal. Sometimes I look for Kittle, his hand's in the dirt. He plays like the tight ends you and I grew up on, right? Chumura, Brent Jones, Novacek. Those guys were not, the wide receivers are out standing up. The tight end's always on the line of scrimmage, and that's part of it with George. Like, Travis Kelce a lot is standing up. George does every once in a while. I'm not saying he doesn't, but he does play much more traditionally, like guys in our generation and older grew up watching tight ends, where now it's like, I bet if we just did a 2-year breakdown of Noah Fant, he probably just stands up a lot. Why wouldn't you? I mean, he's 6'5", he can run a 4.4.
260 pounds.
If you didn't know who Kyle Pitts was,
receiver,
you'd never heard of him or any thought of him. If I just said, "What'd you think of number 8 today?" You'd be like, "God damn, I get why they traded Julio."
I'd be like, "It's a good receiver." Yeah. Right?
And he's a good example. Wasn't he considered a generational talent? Then that's how they talk about him?
Yeah, I mean, part of that, I think, is just if you're going to be a big guy, I think that's mostly where that comes from, is most big guys can't catch. Most big guys can't run at 250 or whatever Noah Fant was coming out.
I know, but he plays a position where it's like they do need he needs.
Yeah, I would call that a generational prospect just because there's not, in the percentage of guys that come into the NFL, a very small percentage look like Noah Fant with his speed. But
it's not fair. I mean,
like, to me, it's like if you don't block and you're just like a top 10 receiver, then cool, that's what you are. But that's not generational.
Well, like if Kyle Pitts was on,
and Noah Fant's not that, I don't think.
If Kyle Pitts was on the Niners, wouldn't he basically just be? I mean, obviously he's much better than Juwan Jennings, but that's what role he would play. They'd put him in the slot, wouldn't they?
Yeah. If he was on this team.
I'm saying if he was on the Niners, wouldn't he just play over 15 and they would just have 3 wide receivers?
But I think Kyle, part of it might be like, okay, you're going to block a little more. You're going to do a little more than Juwan does. Kyle might do that with him.
But this is where you get to a point where some guys, whether it's, like Zach Ertz is not scared, but he's not a blocker. Right? Yeah. So it's like you waste time when you just put him, just let him run around.
Put Juszczyk over there?
Yeah. Just why you have guys on the team that just can just block, But there is something to be said about guys that can do both, right? It is a huge, because isn't it just like if the guy's on the line of scrimmage, like 85 is, I think this is why Philly kind of transitioned to Dallas Goedert. There really aren't that many tight ends like that. But you don't know when you just run a normal 2 wide receivers, Juszczyk and a running back, and George, if they're going to run it or pass it.
Well, I think that, to use a baseball comparison, I think the tight ends that play like George Kittle, and there aren't many, even maybe you could argue this for even Kelce. Cal Ripken Jr. revolutionized the shortstop position when at 6'3", which is big for a shortstop, and a guy that could hit for power, started playing that position. And then you started getting more players like that who were not, that was largely glove only. Like, you just played defense. That was your thing. Anything we got out of you, at the plate was bonus money. And it wasn't much. Like, you weren't hitting 3rd or 4th or 5th. And I think that's Kittle. That's what the modern tight end is like, what the shortstop became when they started getting bigger players who became real, true weapons. And, I guess in some ways positional mismatches in baseball, but they are mismatches in the pass game because defenses aren't built to treat that guy like he can catch.
You know where the greatest defensive shortstop of all time went to college?
Cal Poly? Ozzie Smith?
The Wizard. Yep.